Before Islam became a civilization, before cities were connected by shared knowledge and law, the world looked very different. Not just different, actually, it was deeply fragmented. Imagine a land where every single tribe follows its own law, where alliances change like the wind, and where survival depends not on justice, but on sheer strength. This was the reality of the Arabian Peninsula. So here's the real question we're digging into for this explainer. Why did a radically new form of society become absolutely necessary here at this specific time? Was it just about a new religion, or was it something much deeper about how we humans organize ourselves? To understand this massive transformation, we first have to understand the deeply divided world that existed before it. Arabia wasn't a unified state, not even close. It was a chaotic collection of independent tribes, each with its own identity and rules. There was zero central authority, no shared legal system, and honestly, justice usually depended on raw power and tribal loyalty rather than any kind of moral principle. But the region wasn't entirely isolated either. Right next door, you had massive, highly centralized superpowers like the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, with strict, established laws. Arabia was deeply fragmented, but they were inextricably linked to these giant empires through incredibly lucrative trade routes. So the world wasn't empty, but it was incredibly unstable. As trade poured wealth and individualism into cities like Makkah, trust grew fragile, and the old safety nets broke down. And this brings us to a crucial historical point. Civilizations don't just magically emerge in empty spaces. They emerge during severe crises of structure. Right in the middle of this fragmented, chaotic world, a massive turning point happened in Makkah. The Prophet Muhammad and the Quran introduced a radically different idea, a message centered not on your tribe, your wealth, or your social status, but on meaning and responsibility. It was the revolutionary concept that human beings are fundamentally accountable to a higher moral order. But here's the thing about history. Ideas alone do not physically build societies. You can't just introduce a brilliant new concept to a world controlled by powerful tribal bosses and expect things to stay calm. They resisted, and tensions exploded. This immense pressure led to a historic migration known as the Hijra. But this wasn't just a group of people escaping persecution to another city. It was actually the launch of an unprecedented, radical new social experiment. Let's take a closer look at this experiment in Medina, because it's where things get really fascinating. What happened here was a complete structural flip. We're talking a massive shift from the old way, where tribal loyalty and rule by strength meant everything, to a totally new way of living, a shared civic structure built on mutual protection and a unified moral law. Through what became known as the Constitution of Medina, a written agreement was made. Different groups of people who previously had absolutely no shared system were suddenly brought together to define their mutual rights and responsibilities. For the very first time in this region, society wasn't based just on bloodlines. This wasn't merely the birth of a religion. It wasn't just a mega-tribe or a single city. It was the foundation of a completely new kind of civilization, built on law, ethics, and a collective identity. And this early formation completely redefines how we should think about human history. In fact, centuries later, the brilliant thinker Ibn Khaldun hit the nail on the head. He pointed out that true civilization isn't just about giant monuments or massive armies. It's actually about systems of human organization and social cohesion. It's about the invisible glue that holds people together. So before we even start studying massive empires, we have to understand this ultimate takeaway. Civilization does not begin with expanding borders on a map. It begins with transformation. You have to fundamentally change how people connect and treat each other first. And that kind of transformation always begins when a fractured world stops for a second to ask one much deeper question. How do we live together? In our next explainer, we'll shift from formation to expansion and see how this single community grew into a global civilization. Catch you then.